Welcome back to Evony Made Easy. In today's video, I'm going to talk through my thought process for picking a PvP general. Today's example, we're going to look at Siege PvP specifically. The first thing to realize is that there's a whole lot of numbers in Evony. We've got buffs, we've got march sizes, and there's a lot of confusion over the way those two factors interact to really add power to your march. So let me first talk about kind of the methodology behind this, and then we'll get into the numbers and kind of talk through my thought process for picking the generals that I would recommend to my teammates for both an all-out attacking siege general as well as for a siege general where reinforcing plays a bigger role, for example, for a big siege march. Okay, so let's get started. In terms of the methodology, really here we want to get a few key concepts across. One is the idea of transferable versus general-specific buffs. What I'm calling transferable buffs, these are the kind of the buffs that will be you can move from one general to another. When you upgrade a general from your siege general from whoever you have to a different general, the very first thing you're going to do is you're going to move over your either your spirit beast or dragon over to that new general. You're going to move over your very best siege general gear, and all the buffs associated with those things are transferable. So they effectively form the base. No matter what you do, you're going to get at least those buffs with any general you pick. Even if it was the worst general possible from the tavern, you will still get those buffs. The general-specific buffs, these are the ones that are added just by that general. These are coming from the general's special skill, their specialties, any ascensions you think you're able to accomplish, the covenants, and also from compatible skill books. So, and the key thing here is that we're including the skill books that are compatible because not every general can accept every skill book that's out there. So that also becomes a differentiator between the different generals. We want to factor that into our analysis. Okay, so that's the difference between transferable and general-specific buffs. I've depicted them here in this chart below. On the vertical axis, we have the buff stats per troop. So think of this as how strong each troop is. And then on the horizontal axis, we have the number of the troops in the march. So this is your march size. And so really what we're trying to accomplish here is we're trying to measure the area of this chart. Basically, the bigger the area, the more, the stronger each troop is times the number of troops in your march. That's going to equate to a stronger march overall. And so what I've done here is I've tried to depict the kind of the relationship between these two. So think of your total transferable stats from the transferable buffs. This is your base. And I'll show you exactly how we figure that out in a moment. And what we're really interested in when we rank generals or we look at how much value a new general adds to your march is we're looking at really trying to optimize or maximize, I should say, the area of this blue area here, right? The more they add in terms of buffs, the higher the chart grows, and the more march size they add, the wider it grows. And it's the total area in blue here that we really, really care about. Okay, so step one is we're going to look at the buff stats per troop. To get that, in this case, I'm going to focus on T14. That's my highest siege tier. T15, whatever siege tier you're interested in. You may want to focus on T11 if you're focused on your T11 march. Totally up to you. And I'll show you how we can adapt this calculator, this spreadsheet to handle that. So we're going to start off with our base attack stat for T14 siege. And we're going to multiply that by 1. So we're going to keep the base. And we're going to add the percentage buffs that we get from the general. So let's say we had an attacking siege buff of 1,000%, and we send a full march of T14 siege. Each T11 siege troop would have a buffed attack stat of this 36,000 number. So that you may wonder where this 3280 comes from. The base troop stats for a T14 siege troop are actually, you'll find those in the Evony Wiki. They call this their troops initial stats list. And here you'll see the base stats for each tier and for each troop type. So in this example, I'm focused on T14 siege. My attack is 3280, and that's the number I'm showing in this calculation right here. But I use these other numbers later on in the spreadsheet as well. You'll see that in a moment. Okay, so we have our base stat. We're adding our percentage buffs onto the base here. And this is effectively, so each siege troop in my march, it doesn't have 3280 as its attack stat. It actually has 36,080. And so effectively that's the height of this chart here. Okay. One side note is, I see in a lot of videos, I see a lot of people talking about this. When you go into your workshop for Siege and you tap on a T14 Siege troop, you will see a different number there for attack, defense, and HP than what you see in the Evony Wiki Guide link that I showed over here. Those numbers in your workshop, those are buffed stats. Okay, they're in green, and that's your clue that they're buffed. And if you really want to prove that to yourself, here's a little trick you can do. Have a look at your stats in that workshop area, and now what you do is you change your monarch gear. Change your monarch gear from Siege away from Siege or vice versa, and you'll see those numbers change. That tells you that at a minimum, the monarch gear you're wearing is going to influence those stats, and so we don't want that. That's affecting this number here as well. What we want is the base stat. So again, just never ever make that mistake of relying on the numbers that you see in the workshop. Okay, so let's talk about, now that we know how powerful each troop is in our march, let's look at, well, how big is our march, or how powerful is our march overall? What's the total attack stat in our march? Well, that's pretty easy. We take the 36,080 we calculated per troop, multiplied by the number of troops, and we get 90.2 billion, like with a B, billion attack in that march. And this is what really gets thrown into the battle simulator for calculating the battle outcome. So it's really the number we're trying to maximize, right? So this is what we're focusing on, and so that's why I say it's not just about percentage buffs, it's also about march size and the interaction between the two. You're looking for, again, to maximize the area of this chart. Okay, so let's look at how we can figure out, how do we differentiate then between our transferable stats and our general specific stats. So to do this, we do something that I call the dud to stud challenge. And the concept of this is really pretty simple. You go into the tavern and you recruit the absolute worst general you can find. We're talking 1,000 gold here. You're looking for the lowest stats possible. And I'm talking like if you can find them with 10 or less, perfect, right? You're not going to cultivate them. You're not going to level them up. You're not going to do anything whatsoever to develop them. Really all you're doing here is you're looking for a general that you can transfer your dragon or spirit beast over to, and you can hang your very best gear off of them, because those are those transferable buffs you want to incorporate into your numbers. So this is our dud, okay? This person we require, the general we pull out of the tavern for bare minimum possible, that's our dud. Okay, we're going to make him a stud by outfitting him with the best gear and spirit beast, and we're not adding anything else, no skill books either. Okay, now we go attack an empty keep, right? We do this with a full march, and we make note of our percentage buffs and march size buffs from that. Now, if you go into the cultivate screen in Evony, what you'll see is there's a it'll show the buffs that general gets from their base stats. Okay, in my example, they're in the 1 to 4% range. So to be really precise with this, I'm actually going to subtract those 1 to 4% numbers from the percentage buffs that I got on my battle report. And what this will give me is it'll give me my transferable percent buffs, in this case when attacking, right? So the absolute worst I could possibly do is with these stats, assuming that I actually include a general with my march with the right gear on. Okay, so just to finish this example from above, right, we had 90.2 billion based on all these assumptions up here. Well, what if in our dud to stud challenge, we found that actually the attacking buff was 750%, and our march size was 2.3 million. In this case, right, that would effectively, that becomes my base transferable buffs. And so my transferable buffs then are the 64.1 billion attack in the attacking scenario. To figure out how much value that our general is adding, right, all we have to do is we subtract the 64.1 from the 90.2. So 26.1 is our total buffed march stats from our general that we were using originally to get that 1,000 number, that 1,000% buff above, and the 2.5 million march size. Okay, I'll go through some other examples of this to kind of explain a bit more detail later, but that's the overall gist of it. Now let's talk about effective conditions. This is something as well that a lot of people get wrong and really miss out on. Not all generals have the same buffs in all scenarios. When you look at the general skill, Could be in their specialty, could be in their special skill, could be in their, it could also be in their ascensions. What you'll notice is that they use these key phrases when leading the army, marching, or when leading the army to attack. And so we call these effective conditions. You also see these in blazons as well, actually. So when attacking, so if a general has the phrase when leading the army, that buff will work when they're attacking, when they're, in air quotes, marching, and when they're reinforcing. The same is true for a similar story with marching buffs. Marching buffs work when attacking and also when marching. And then the most restrictive of these sort of buff or the phrases for the general skills is when leading the army to attack. Those only work when attacking. Okay, so that could be attacking in a rally, it could be attacking in a solo situation, but they will not work when either marching or when reinforcing. And that'll play a big role in terms of the way we want to use our generals and when those buffs are effective and when they'll actually be useful in battles. The other key thing I wanted to talk about is what I call achievable buffs. A lot of the general rankings and ratings that I see make the assumption that the general is fully maxed out and developed. That's not realistic for all players in Evony. We can't all get a Melisande to 5 red stars with skin and everything else associated with that. And so we have to be more realistic. For the vast majority of Evony players, certainly like me, I'm not in a position to spend the money needed to get all these buffs and unlock them and fully maximize the general's potential. So what I want to do, though, is I want to compare, let's say a premium general with maybe 1 star. If I'm really focused and save up general tokens and really push hard, maybe I can push a new general up to 3 red stars if I really focus on that. But those are the sort of my options, right? So, but whereas if I look at a tavern general like Matthias or Ulysses S. Grant as a siege general, I could eventually get all the fragments I need in order to be able to fully ascend them. So I want to make some comparisons like that to see, should I go for a premium siege general or do I go with a tavern general? Or at some point in the future, Evony puts them in relics, maybe there'll be a relic general or something like that. Okay, so that's what I'm talking about when I talk about achievable buffs. And then what I just described about saving up your general tokens until you have enough to get really I would say 3 or more red stars. That's what I'm talking about when I call like the opportunistic non-coiner strategy, right? Save up your general tokens and just drop them all at once, hoping to get 7 copies, which is what you need in order to get a new general, plus the 6 you need to get them to 3 red stars or more. The reason I would set the bar at 3 is that quite often the 2nd red star gets you nothing in the way of buffs or march size. And 3 red stars is sometimes where you get a march size buff, and often where you'll get more attacking buffs as well. So I would sort of look at it like that. I would say in most cases, just by eventually cashing in premium general tokens or regular general tokens, every non-coiner has at least a chance of getting 1 or 2 copies of pretty much every general that's available within those tokens, right? So you might the way I would look at it is that I'll set the bar at a minimum of 1 red star for analysis purposes, thinking that I will eventually get at least 2 copies of a general if I wait long enough. In terms of the way we include buffs from main and assistant generals, buffs from generals come from a variety of sources. Okay, they come from their basic attributes. I'm using at 10 gold stars and 500 cultivation. They come from their base skills or their special skill. In some cases, with or without a dragon, and I'll show you how we adapt for that in terms of whether you actually have a dragon, for example, to put on your siege general. Not every player does, and so that has to factor into your analysis as well. How many red stars you think you can get out of it, including buffs from specialties. If there's a skin or covenant applicable, we can consider that. And then also from the compatible skill books. If we're talking about using a general as an assistant, then we include the buffs from the base skill, from their specialties, and if applicable, skin and or covenant. And so that's just to give it kind of a sense as to how it all comes together. I'll say right up front, this methodology isn't perfect. In terms of that dud to stud challenge, we're basing our assumptions off of are transferable buffs when attacking, and it's accurate for that scenario. I don't really have a great way, though, and if anyone does have a great way of doing this, please let me know in the comments below. How do we measure what our transferable buffs are for marching or for reinforcing? For reinforcing, you could potentially use if you have a friend or have yourself a Watchtower 41 that can see reinforcing buffs and march size, awesome. Most players don't at this point, at least in Evony. So there's a few things like that there are a few inherent limitations to the numbers you'll see here, but I don't think it drastically affects the overall ratings or comparisons between generals. I'm also not factoring in flat refinements on gear or dragons. So that's another potential thing that will affect, if you like, the height of that chart that I was showing previously. And I haven't included every single general in Evony. I've tried to focus on basically the premium generals and the most viable non-premium generals available from the tavern. But obviously, and over time, there'll be new generals coming out as well. So this will be dated information, but at least it'll give you a sense as to the thought process behind it. Okay, so let's get into it then. When we look at the generals themselves, I'm going to start by calibrating my ratings based on, right now, the highest level I can get a general to is 42. I've got my rally spot up to level 40, which means my base march size is 550,000. Again, when you look at your rally spot, you were looking at this number reflects the base march size. This buffed march size represents, in my dud to stud challenge, it was this 4,065,695. And these were the attack, defense, and HP buffs I got when I did that attack. So that's really where those numbers are coming from. And as before, here are my base troop stats for my T14 siege: 3280, 1560, and 3280 attack, defense, and HP. So here's where we get into the meat of it now. These are the different generals that I'm comparing, right? And they're just here alphabetically. There's no real rhyme or reason to it, other than being alphabetical. That's just for the sake of some formulas that I'll show you later in the general combinations tab. I've color-coded them, though. The blue ones represent generals where their primary focus of their buffs is on an attacking scenario. So Churchill being a rally-focused general, we've got Gunther, Hunyadi, etc. These are the ones that are going to perform best in an attacking scenario. The ones in purple, these are the ones that have the leading the army clause, and the majority of their buffs are applicable pretty much everywhere, whether attacking, marching, or reinforcing. And therefore, those are the ones that are going to be a bit more flexible for those situations, like, let's say, for Big Siege, where you might use the same march preset for attacking a big siege with a Big Siege march, but also for reinforcing one of your teammates in a battlefield situation. Okay? Now, in terms of the red stars, I'm really just counting how many levels of ascension we're doing on the generals. So 1 red star is pretty self-explanatory. Matthias, though, being a tavern general, I think pretty much anyone can get him up to 5 red stars. Same thing for Sherman or for Ulysses S. Grant. The rest of these are premium generals. I'm going to leave them at 1 for today's purposes. If there's a dragon or beast requirement, in some cases I often find that it's relatively easier to assign a spirit beast to a general, so Teach and Gunther, for example, whereas someone like Ulysses S. Grant requires a dragon, so does Serena. And for my purposes, at least in my situation, I don't think that's realistic for me, and probably not for most non-coiners as well. For Palace, again, that's a spirit beast too. So essentially what we do is if we think we can get the buffs from this requirement embedded in the general's skills or specialties, then we would put a yes here, otherwise it's a no. In terms of skins, I haven't had much luck with getting skins, to be honest, so I'm leaving all those at no. And then we get into the covenants. I've broken this out into into 3 here. The reason I'm thinking of it this way is that the War and Cooperation Covenant, that's the first covenant in each general. Typically, if you have your main general plus 1 more covenant general, you can achieve that. And that's why these are fairly easy to get. The Peace or Faith, typically you need a second covenant general in addition to the first 2. And then in order to, at least my experience has been, in order to get all 3 levels of the covenant, you really do need the main general plus all 3 of the covenant generals associated with them. And in some cases, that's a bit trickier, right? So Gunther, for example, one of his covenant generals is Melisande. She's a very difficult to get general. I mean, you may get her eventually, but at least in my experience, I haven't been that lucky. Likewise, Melisande has some generals that are tricky to get. In her company, I believe it's Eleanor, if I'm not mistaken. And so for this reason, I'm kind of calibrating this a little bit, basically to say, well, what do I think is realistic for me? And so these numbers over this, to the right-hand side, we're looking at, how much, what are the total buffed March stats coming from, each of these generals when they're acting as the main general. And then in this section over here, we're looking at how much they add when acting as the assistant. So the way you would read this, let's say for John Hunyadi, he's adding 55 billion points of attack when attacking, but only 41.4 when marching, and 39.4 when reinforcing. On defense, he's adding 20.6, 19.6, and 17.4 when attacking, marching, and reinforcing. And then obviously the same kind of thought process applies for HP and for all the other generals. When he's an assistant, he's giving 15.3 when attacking, 6.7 when attacking on defense, 16.7 billion points of defense to the march when attacking, and 8 billion points of HP to the whole march when attacking as well. So that's the way you sort of look at all these different scenarios here. In terms of the color coding here, I've got some conditional formatting going on, and really all it is the brighter the green, the higher the performance of the general relative to the other generals for that particular thing. So essentially each column is color-coded. In the case of attacking attack, Theodosius wins that one, adding the most. When acting as a main, he adds the most, at least, again, based on all these other parameters. He adds the most to the siege march when attacking, followed by Gunther and then Hunyadi. When we're looking at as an assistant, same kind of idea. So basically each column is color-coded. The brighter the green, the better the general for that specific scenario. But you do start to see some themes here, right? So the generals that have sort of more of an overall focus, I think of it like as a reinforcing focus, they really stand out here, right? So Maurice de Saxe, Melisande, Mu Guiying, Edward Teach, etc. You can see that they tend to have more balanced buffs across all these different scenarios, and this is something that's often missed, again, in these overall general rankings you might see elsewhere. Then when we put it all together, we can look at general combinations. Now the tricky part with this is that there's a whole series of complicated rules around which generals are compatible with whom. I don't pretend to know all of these combinations, and somewhat frustratingly, these combinations can change over time, often shortly after the general is introduced. There's been a few examples where that's occurred and been very frustrating for a lot of players. What I've been using for the purposes of these calculations is I'm looking at, again, the Evony Guide Wiki, and looking at their Assistant General page here, looking at which combinations are valid, and really just bringing over all the combinations that could be possible and deleting the ones that are incompatible with each other. That's really the thought process behind these rankings. So now we come back to where we started. These are the different combinations that are possible, at least according to the information that I've been able to obtain through my research. And now it just becomes a matter of figuring out, well, which general stat am I most interested in? What am I trying to optimize for, in other words? So if I'm interested in what's the best, siege general for attacking attack, I'm going to do this. I'm going to sort on, my attack stat for siege when attacking and see from highest to lowest who's the best. So for my purposes, John Hunyadi with Gunther is a great option. John and Theodosius, also a great option. So this also gives you a sense too is how much of a real difference there is here. Is that extra 0.4 billion in the overall march really worth going after for a general upgrade? You have to decide that as a player. For me, I would let it slide. To me, that's not going to make a big difference. It's not going to change the outcome of at least any of the battles I've been involved with. If I was interested in, again, maybe more of a big siege scenario, I'm going to factor in reinforcing into the mix. Let's have a look at this one here. So in this one, you see that I would be giving up some of the. Remember, the maximum here was just over 62 for Hunyadi and Gunther. So I am giving up something in the way of attacking attack buffs, but what I'm gaining are in the marching scenario and also in the reinforcing scenario. I'm getting a better balance of when these buffs are applicable. So it's basically a more versatile general combination. And in my case, the one I would pick or aim for as a big siege general combination would be Maurice de Saxe, assisted by Melisande. And the main reason here is that although it's number 2 in the attack category, Look at how much more defense and HP buffs you get in your march from this combination versus Melisande and Edward Teach, or from Maurice de Saxe and Edward Teach. So again, just a few different things to look at. It's not all about one number, but I do think by looking at the way these generals are designed, this gives you a better insight into that and allows you to make more accurate general choices. So now we've kind of stepped through this and looked at it from kind of beginning to end. Let's go back to our general tab here. Okay, so this is looking at the scenario for, I would call this a sort of like a non-coiner scenario. In other words, somebody who, with over time, will can eventually get 1 or 2 copies of a general. In this case, we're assuming at least 2 copies of each general for purposes of calculating the main general buffs, except for the tavern generals, where we're assuming that someone could eventually get all 5. Well, let's turn this around now. Let's go back and revisit these assumptions, and let's turn it up to 11 basically. Let's crank everyone up and and max everyone out. To do that, we're going to bump this up to 5 all the way down the board, and we're going to assume we have as many dragons and spirit beasts as we need. We get all the skins, and we can do every covenant that's out there. And here's essentially where we get to. So going back to our, in this case, you can see that, again, Gunther and John Hunyadi do quite well on attacking attack buffs. Gunther's HP buff stands out quite well here. But you can see there's other scenarios here as well where, Melisande's getting up there as a main general too. So coming back to our general combinations, looking at which one would we put together, well, let's do the same thing again. I'm going to focus again on attack, and for siege troops, attack is a pretty important stat to optimize for. Let's look at this. So here we're looking at 81.7 for, again, Hunyadi and Gunther, Hunyadi and Theodosius, or Theodosius, gets pretty much in the same order. So what's interesting about this is that the combinations, or the rankings are actually fairly similar for this. What changes though is when you start to look at Melisande and Gunther pop up to the top of the list. Maurice de Saxe and Gunther, their attack stats are pretty high here, but then we also have reasonable marching and reinforcing stats as well. So again, just a few different ways of looking at this. You might, and that for people that can only afford, or can only realistically just want to focus on a single siege general pairing to start with, maybe you do want to look at a combination of high attacking stats with maybe not the best marching and reinforcing stats, but something in the ballpark here, right? So you can see a clear improvement here. You're giving up, let's say, Melisande and Gunther, you're giving up a little bit in the way of attack, or attack when attacking, but you're getting a lot when marching or reinforcing. And maybe that's a good trade-off for you. Again, just trying to give you different scenarios where these kind of numbers and rankings might be helpful. Let's again look at the reinforcing scenario and rank based on that. Oh, here we go. Maurice de Saxe and Melisande. That combination came up again. And then likewise, Melisande and Edward Teach, Maurice de Saxe and Edward Teach. So what's interesting about this is that when you play out these different scenarios and look at the number of red stars and specialties and whatnot, at the end of the day, the ones at the top tend to be very similar, regardless of how far you're pushing them. And so that's why I'm pretty comfortable saying that, for an all-out attacking march, Hunyadi and Gunther is a great pairing. And whether you're a non-coiner or if you're you're pushing things to the max and spending significantly more on the game for that. And likewise, for a reinforcing scenario, I would look at this pairing as well, Maurice de Saxe and Melisande, or some combination of really any of these 3 combinations I would say are great. And especially if Maurice de Saxe assisted by Melisande, because look at all the defense and HP buffs you're getting up here as well, which is really quite relatively speaking, is quite strong. So again, that's my thought process behind picking generals. I can and obviously the same principles here can be applied to other troop types, whether it's ranged, ground, or mounted. And I'm happy to do that. If there is interest in me doing this type of analysis for those other troop types, please drop a comment below. If you have any feedback or comments on this approach and the way I'm doing this, please let me know that as well. I'm happy to hear feedback and happy to make adjustments if possible. I will include links to this spreadsheet in the description. The thing to bear in mind is that in order to be able to sort and use this spreadsheet, what you'll have to do is you have to make a copy of it in Google Docs. So that'll be your own personal copy. You'll be able to edit that one and play around with numbers as you see fit. So if you wanted to adjust this, you can do that. And so feel free to have a look at that and play around. There is one last thing I wanted to show where this approach can be helpful. So I'm going to go back to sort of a non-coiner view of things here, and basically reset things back to where we started. And the reason I'm going to do that is I want to show you another thing that I think is a worthwhile scenario for using this. In my case, I have Hunyadi as my main siege general, and I got him by basically following that opportunistic non-coiner strategy. I saved up a bunch of tokens, dropped them all at once, and got enough copies of him to get him to 3 red stars. So right now, for me at least, this is my reality. I've got him at 3 red stars, and the rest of these generals, because these have already been released in previous events, I'm probably not going to get any of them past 1 red star. So for my purposes, you can see if I look at his attack here, that's, he's better than Theodos. He's better than John Hunyadi at 3 red stars is better than I can realistically get Theodosius now that I can't get more copies of Theodosius easily. So for my purposes, that's the bar that another general has to beat. If I look ahead to upcoming siege generals, maybe I need to look at can they beat Maurice de Saxe at this one, right? Or maybe if I can get those new ones up to 3 red stars, this is essentially the bar they have to beat. And so it gives me a sense as to whether the upgrade is worth it or not. So again, just trying to share some thoughts around this. There's obviously a lot of information here, a lot of numbers. But in terms of different scenarios where you can use this information, I think it really boils down to how do you pick the right general for the march you're trying to create, in terms of how much of the key stats they can add to your march overall. And that's the way I measure it this way. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to leave them below. And if not, I'll see you next time.